Well, good morning and welcome to CBS News Mornings. It's almost 7 o'clock here in New York City. I'm Anne-Marie Green, and here's a look at the stories grabbing our attention right now. Efforts to open a humanitarian corridor in Mariupol have intensified this morning as President Zelensky accuses Russia of war crimes and genocide in communities just outside of Kyiv, saying Western sanctions are not going far enough. We have team coverage of the Ukrainian war and the growing humanitarian crisis there. Plus, 6 people are dead and at least 12 injured after what police are calling the largest mass shooting in Sacramento history. We're going to be following new developments on the number of potential suspects still on the run. And weather made for some unfriendly skies over the weekend. Thousands of flights were delayed or canceled, leaving passengers stressed and stranded. We're going to tell you where things stand this morning. In Money Watch, we are talking politics and economics as experts warn when it comes to Russia's rebounding ruble, things aren't always what they seem. Then we're recapping the must-see moments of music's biggest night. We will have an in-depth look at the sights and sounds of the 2022 Grammy Awards.
This is for real artists, real musicians. Let's just keep going. Be you. That's it. I love you even if I don't know you. Good night. Hey!
So, of course, even music's biggest night could not escape the harsh reality of the war in Ukraine. In addition to musical tributes, a message was played from Ukraine's president addressing the ongoing atrocities overseas. So this morning, there are new calls for more sanctions against Russia as evidence of war crimes appears to be mounting. Ukrainian officials say Russian forces left behind a, quote, scene from a horror movie as they withdrew from areas near Kyiv. Naomi Ruckham has more.
The Ukrainian military says it has regained control of the area around Kyiv. After more than 5 weeks of fighting, Moscow is moving its forces away from the capital and towards southern and eastern Ukraine. The departure of the Russians was followed by a series of grim discoveries outside the city. Ukraine says the remains of 410 civilian victims were recovered in Bucha and other towns. Some appeared to have been killed with their hands tied. Others showed signs they were tortured.
This is genocide. We are being destroyed and exterminated.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described the atrocities as acts of concentrated evil and said the world needs to do more to end Russia's invasion.
Tell the truth about the war on your social networks, on TV, support us in any way you can, any but not silence.
Zelensky took that message to the Grammy Awards, pleading for help in a pre-recorded video that was played during last night's show. The Kremlin said none of its troops have targeted civilians in Ukraine. A spokesman for Russia's defense ministry accused Kyiv officials of staging scenes of carnage for the media.
All right, we're going to take you to Rivne now, and we're going to check in with the mayor there, Alexander Tretiak. Alexander, thanks for joining us again. I see you in your office still doing the mayor's work, which has become radically different than what it was when you were first elected. But it's good to see you well, particularly because we had heard recently about an oil depot in the region being targeted. So I'm curious as to whether or not that has had an impact on your city and how your city is doing right now.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here on your stream. And I have to say that the enemy trying to deprive us from resources and trying to destroy all our oil depots to limit us in our work and in our efforts to keep situation good. And of course, we are fighting. We keep fighting and we never give up. And despite this, we don't give up. So we still have enough resources and we support our army, we support our people. Our gas stations still functioning, and we have enough oil to support our city and to support our infrastructure we have in our city.
Right now, the world is reacting to the images that we are seeing out of areas just outside of Kyiv, Bucha in particular. You know, your president describes it as the scene out of a horror movie. President Zelensky was speaking on Face the Nation over the weekend. I want to play a little bit of what President Zelensky had to say, and then we'll talk afterwards.
Is this genocide?
Indeed, this is genocide. The elimination of the whole nation and the people. We are the citizens of Ukraine. We have more than 100 nationalities.
So, Mayor, your reaction to the images that are coming out of that area, what are you hearing from your constituents? I mean, people must be terrified.
Yes, I support my president that this is a genocide. Exactly, this is a genocide. So we expect the world community the proper assesses this horrific tragedy. And in Bucha, in the town of Bucha, was discovered the mass grave for 300 people. 300 innocent people were killed by Russians. And among them, even my friend. I lost my friend in Bucha. And many people who knows friends, who has relatives in Bucha, they are just crying right now. So these couple days, we're just crying about these innocent people who were killed by Russians. And we suppose that world community have to show the right place for Russia. And I want to confirm one more time, Russia, this is a country terrorist #1 in the world. And we have to do something with this. So why Russian soldiers killed just hundreds innocent people? So we have to condemn this country that send its troops and to make a terror in peaceful Ukrainian cities, towns, and villages. So right now, we're just sending a lot of humanitarian help and support to Bucha, to Irpin, to cities that around Kyiv. But we never cannot find words to express our condolences and to express our warm and our support for those who lost their loved ones.
I'm so sorry to hear that you lost a friend of yours as well. Yeah, this is really tough, and I appreciate you talking to us each and every time. I think this is the third time you've made time for us. Stay safe, please.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for your support, and thank you for trying to spread as much as you can information, truth information. Because some people still say that this is a conflict in my country, that this is not a war or something else. This is a real war, and this is a real genocide, and against Ukrainian nation and other people and other nationalities that were populated in Bucha.
Mayor Tretiak, thank you. Well, we are learning new details about a horrific shooting over the weekend in Sacramento. Police are looking for at least 2 suspects who went on a shooting spree in the downtown area and killed 6 people, injuring more than a dozen. Steve Large from CBS News Sacramento has the latest on that.
A crowd fighting in downtown Sacramento when gunfire erupted. The shooting left at least 6 people dead. Among those killed, Frank Turner's son, Devassier.
He walked out the club and he walked into some and got shot.
12 others were hospitalized. Several of them are fighting for their lives as officials try to determine a motive for this mass shooting.
This senseless epidemic of gun violence must be addressed.
Across California, homicides are up 30% from 2020, and nationwide, an average of 37% in the biggest cities. On CBS's Face the Nation, New York City Mayor Eric Adams said he's trying to stop the flow of guns into communities.
We're zeroing in on dangerous gangs and zeroing in on those who are trigger pullers and carrying guns.
In Sacramento, as police investigate the deadly shooting, the city and victims' families grieve together.
I'm heartbroken.
When you include the dozen wounded, Sunday's violence would be the worst mass shooting in Sacramento history. Steve Large, CBS News, Sacramento.
Well, jury selection is expected to begin today for the Parkland shooter who murdered 17 people at Florida's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018. Nicholas Cruz has already pleaded guilty to all charges, but jurors will now decide whether he receives life in prison or the death penalty. The jury is expected to hear statements from family members of those who were killed before deciding Cruz's fate. And jury deliberations are set to begin today in the federal trial of 4 men accused of plotting to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Nearly 40 witnesses were called to testify during the trial that ended last week. Prosecutors say Daniel Harris, Adam Fox, Barry Croft Jr., and Brandon Caserta were angry over Whitmer's COVID-19 restrictions and had major issues with the government. Defense attorneys argue that there was no real conspiracy to kidnap the governor and claim it was all talk. People flying are hoping that skies will be a little smoother today. After a nightmare over the weekend when it came to travel, more than 12,000 flights were delayed or canceled, mainly because of severe weather. JetBlue, Delta, Spirit, Frontier, and Southwest all delayed at least 20% of their flights yesterday.
Every 30 minutes it kept getting delayed more and more and more, and then we ended up standing in line for 3.5 hours just to get to check in our bags and see if we got another flight out.
On top of weather problems, Southwest also dealt with a major technology issue that halted service. And a major shakeup is underway at Starbucks as the company's former CEO returns to the spotlight. So coming up later this hour, we'll explain why the ongoing fight to unionize is at the center of all the drama. Plus, South Carolina is still celebrating an epic March Madness victory from over the weekend. Coming up later this hour, we'll have all the highlights from the women's championship game, plus a look at the men's final. But first, it is 7:11 on the East Coast. Time to check out your local weather.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We continue our coverage now of the war in Ukraine, where a partial Russian withdrawal has exposed a devastating number of bodies in Bucha. Ukraine's president is now accusing Russia of genocide. Holly Williams is in Zaporizhia with more on this. Holly, good morning.
Good morning. Russian troops have withdrawn from around Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, but there are no celebrations in this country because what they've left behind is sickening. And we want to warn you that our report contains some deeply disturbing material.
In the town of Bucha, the streets are littered with bodies in civilian clothing. Some, with their hands tied behind their back, appear to have been executed. Others are buried in a mass grave. More than 300 residents were killed, according to the mayor. In the village of Kalinivka, Irina Kostenko says the Russians killed her only son, Alexei. The pain is so bad, she says. He was only 27 years old. She says she brought Alexei's body back in a wheelbarrow and buried him by herself in the garden, wrapped in a rug in a shallow grave. Showing a photo of Alexei as a child, she says, "This is my love, my sweetheart." On a highway outside Kyiv, Ukrainian officials say these images show the naked corpses of at least 4 women. They claim the Russians tried to burn the bodies. There have been several allegations of rape against Russian troops during this invasion. Ukrainian officials say they're investigating. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of genocide, speaking on Face the Nation yesterday. "We are being destroyed and exterminated," he said, and this is happening in the Europe of the 21st century. The city of Mariupol has been besieged and bombarded by the Russians for weeks. Thousands may be dead, according to the United Nations. But the horrors there can't be counted because Mariupol is cut off. 17-year-old Ilona and her 10-year-old brother Milan made it out of the city on Friday with their father. We found them sitting silently at an evacuation center, apparently shell-shocked. There were constant bombing raids, constant explosions, Ilona told us.
Were there times that you thought you wouldn't make it out alive?
Yes, she said, but we tried to hold ourselves together. We tried not to panic. Russia's denied killing civilians in Bucha, making the extraordinary claim that these scenes were staged. The Russian soldiers who did this will likely never be brought to justice.
Despite those images and thousands of Russian soldiers reported killed, Vladimir Putin's approval rating has gone up to 83%, according to a new poll. But Russian media is restricted in reporting the truth about what's happening here in Ukraine, and many Russians rely on state-controlled news. Anne-Marie.
Yeah, that is a good reminder. So, you point out that Russia has suggested that this whole thing was staged. There's a horrific video that you just showed us. So now Moscow is asking for a special UN Security Council meeting, I presume, to address these accusations. What do we know about this meeting?
So the Russians have called this meeting because they say that these allegations of what happened in Bucha are a, quote, heinous provocation. They've actually gone further than that. We heard from a Kremlin spokesman this morning who said that the videos out of the town of Bucha, which you just saw in our report, cannot be trusted. And he said that the videos show signs of being forgeries and fakes. Now, a US official has responded to that by saying that this is out of the Russian playbook. She predicted that at that UN Security Council meeting, Russia would feign outrage, and she said, quote, "Nobody is buying it."
Well, as you know, Volodymyr Zelensky has called this a massacre. He's not mincing words at all. You know, he is calling on the West, other nations to do more sanctions. How much pressure does this put on other countries to really step up, I guess the pressure, for lack of a better word, on Russia to have an impact? Because it doesn't seem to be having an impact now.
Well, I think it certainly does up the pressure on the West to do more, not just President Zelensky's words when he was speaking on Face the Nation yesterday, but the videos themselves, which are horrifying and have horrified people around the world and sparked international condemnation. Now, look, the US has already given Ukraine around $1.6 billion in security assistance since this invasion began. They announced another $300 million in military assistance on Friday, including drones and armored vehicles. But the Ukrainians make no bones about the fact that they want more, and that comes from everyone from the President Zelensky, down to people we speak to in the Ukrainian military. And specifically, what they would like from the US and its allies are things to defend their skies, aircraft and modern air defense systems.
Holly, thank you very much. So we are following the latest developments in Sacramento. We've been telling you about this. 6 people were killed and a dozen others were hurt in a shooting over the weekend. So we're going to have more on the suspects, the investigation, and everything else after the break. And coming up later on Red and Blue, North Carolina Republicans are taking aim at one of their own, Congressman Madison Cawthorn, ahead of next month's primary election. And this comes after he made some extremely controversial comments on a podcast about a few of his fellow GOP members engaging in orgies and doing cocaine. You heard me right. You can stream that conversation in our 6 p.m. Eastern hour. Plus, in a new episode of Person to Person, CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell sits down with the cast of the TV phenomenon Ted Lasso. O'Donnell went to the pub with Brett Goldstein, who plays rogue around the edges, but lovable soccer star Roy Kent.
Why did Roy Kent feel like a calling for you?
I just think Roy Kent is a really tragic character. And I think I really...
Tragic?
I really understood it. It's like there's a tragedy to the physicality of aging, the tragedy of like his knees aren't working, and that's just very sad. Like there's nothing he can do about that, and he isn't ready to let that be the end. It's this kind of transition in his life of what do you do if the thing you love and the thing you've only known you now can't do, what the do you do?
You can stream the episode tomorrow night at 10:30 Eastern. We'll be right back.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
an original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I'll have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
This week on 60 Minutes, Bill Whitaker sits down with Dominic Grieve, former Conservative Member of Parliament, to discuss how Britain became a so-called cash laundromat for Russian oligarchs, thus becoming Londongrad.
So one has to face up to the fact that if you're going to live in Russia or do business in Russia, you have to dance to the tune of the mafia boss. And the mafia boss is President Putin.
You don't become an oligarch. You don't become a wealthy businessman in Russia without dancing to the tune of Putin.
A lot of Russian businessmen have very close links to the Kremlin. Others don't. But as long as you have a connection to Russia, then the risk is that if you don't conform to the requirements of the Russian state, you will come unstuck.
Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom has welcomed the oligarchs with few questions asked about their fortunes. Instead, a £2 million investment got special visas and a fast track to citizenship for hundreds of oligarchs. Billions of pounds poured in, and Russian tycoons went on a buying spree. Andrei Goryev, an oil billionaire, bought Wintonhurst. In London, only Buckingham Palace is larger. Roman Abramovich purchased the champion Chelsea Soccer Club. There was so much money, Dominic Grieve says, it was hard to tell legitimate investors from crooked ones. The 2019 report found it was so easy to wash dirty cash in Britain, the visa program was known as the laundromat. It sounds quite alarming, what you found in this report.
Everybody on it was in complete agreement that the United Kingdom was in danger of being complacent about the threat that Russia posed in the round, one aspect of which was the fact that we had opened the door to allowing large quantities of Russian money to come into our country and to be invested here.
Was this all a strategy for the oligarchs to sort of build influence here in the UK?
I think the evidence is pretty clear that in some cases it was. It's a question of whether the influence is being used to try to soften up the responses of Western democracies towards the actions of the Russian state.
Well, you can see more of Bill Whitaker's interview with former Conservative Member of Parliament Dominic Grieve tomorrow night at 8 Eastern on CBS News streaming, or watch it anytime on Paramount+. So we're taking a closer look at how the Ukraine war and sanctions are impacting Russia's economy. And this comes as Vladimir Putin financially isolates his country and threatens to cut off Europe's energy supply. We will have all the latest details coming up after the break.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yes. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
Even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Welcome back to CBS News Mornings. The time now is 7:32. Let's get you caught up on some of the news you may have missed. 6 people were killed and 12 others were injured after police say at least 2 people went on a shooting spree outside crowded bars in Sacramento's downtown district. A massive search is now underway for the suspects. Weather is being blamed for grounding or delaying more than 12,000 flights over the weekend. JetBlue, Delta, Spirit, Frontier, and Southwest all delayed at least 20% of their flights yesterday. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for an end to Russian war crimes as Russian forces retreat from around Kyiv. And this comes as world leaders slam Moscow over alleged atrocities committed against civilians. Zelensky also says Western sanctions do not go far enough. Well, the Russian economy in some ways appears to be resilient despite facing severe sanctions. So with us now to discuss this is the chief economist for the Institute of International Finance, Robin Brooks. Thank you so much for joining us, Robin. You're over this way.
Good morning. How are
good
you?
morning. Really good. So what I really wanted to talk to you about is the ruble, which at one point certainly seemed like it was in free fall. And funnily enough, has now sort of appears to have bounced back almost to pre-invasion levels. I know this is not happening organically. Can you walk us through what's being done to inflate the ruble?
Sure. First of all, I'd say don't take the ruble and its recovery at face value. Russia imposed capital controls on its citizens. So if you are a Russian and want to take money out of Russia, which a lot of people currently want to do, then that's not possible. And there are restrictions on how much you can move out. So where ordinarily there would be a lot of selling of the ruble going on, it's currently constrained or prohibited. And so the current recovery of the ruble is, to a large extent, artificial. There is a genuine part to the ruble recovery, however, which is that Russia is a big energy exporter. As you know, natural gas prices and oil prices have gone way up. And so that means there is, every hour of every day, more money coming into Russian coffers for its energy exports, and that is helping the ruble a little bit. So net, it's a little bit of both. Mostly don't trust what you see on the screens.
So there's the value of the ruble, but then there's the actual sort of experience in Russia, how people are living. And the expectation was that these sanctions would be so crippling that, Russians would be miserable. They would feel the pain. Is there a connection between the value of the ruble and the experiences that Russians are actually having? Are they being impacted by this sort of confusing economic situation in Russia?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start, first of all, with a good quote by the late Senator John McCain, who in 2015 said that Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country. And what he meant was Russia basically does one thing, which is to export energy, natural gas, coal, crude oil, and other raw commodities. Sanctions so far have encumbered the ability of the gas station to move money around. They have encumbered the ability of the gas station to use the savings it has in the bank account. They have not yet shut down the true business model of the gas station, which is to provide energy and gas. So that is why Western countries right now are debating an energy embargo. If and when that happens, that will truly be a hit to the Russian economy. But as it stands right now, we are already forecasting GDP to drop minus 15% this year. That's huge. So for regular Russians on the street, this is a very, very difficult and tough experience.
That's the forecast. What's the GDP now? Has it dropped?
GDP is dropping big time. Obviously, data lag, but from everything we can see, demand for consumer durables, all the things that you spend on when you're feeling good about yourself, all of those things have fallen off the cliff. Not to mention that the upper middle class in Russia is fond of, say, Gucci handbags, and those you can't even buy in Russia anymore.
Indeed. Robin Brooks, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So the refugee crisis sparked by Russia's violent invasion of Ukraine has reached America's doorstep. Manuel Bojorquez is in Tijuana, Mexico, with more on that. Good morning, Manny.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Of course, we're talking about Ukrainians who are looking for refuge in the United States. Many of them come here to Mexico on a tourist visa, and then they make their way to this busy port, the port of San Isidro. Now, volunteers who have been working with them say about 150 Ukrainians a day are being allowed into the United States on a humanitarian basis, and more are coming.
Just 1,000 feet from the U.S. border and more than 6,000 miles from home, Ukrainians fleeing war eat and sleep on the streets of Tijuana.
This is your home for the next few days.
Yeah, that's all what I can bring with me.
Anastasia Betu's parents stayed behind.
You have hope that it will get better there.
Just hope, yeah.
Hope.
And pray.
Hope and pray.
Yeah.
Others here stay at hotels, but come back to check their number. The number assigned to them by Ukrainian-American volunteers that determine when they can present themselves to U.S. border agents.
What number are you?
My number 1185.
This is where the encampment started. It's a bus station, the last bus station before reaching the U.S. border. And just days ago, it was only a few dozen people here, but it has grown exponentially. It's now estimated there are more than 1,000 Ukrainians waiting in this general area.
It's the same place where asylum seekers, largely from Latin America and the Caribbean, have previously gathered too. But most have been turned away due to current U.S. immigration policies. At this shelter, they tell us they feel for the Ukrainians, but say they're also facing life and death situations. Like Roxana Ruiz Ramirez from Honduras, who says gangs are threatening to kill her family.
You need help too. Necesitan ayuda también.
For now, more Ukrainians are coming. Volunteers greet them at Tijuana's airport. And a gym is being turned into a shelter. Back at the border,
God bless Ukraine, God bless Mexico, and God bless America.
a woman named Mila from Los Angeles met her 17-year-old grandson who traveled alone for almost a month from Kyiv.
He's very, very happy that he is here on this land and, can be reunited with his family.
Russians are arriving here too, about 800 or so in February, the month the war began. Many of them say they are anti-war and fleeing political persecution, but their cases are more complicated because the U.S. has not created an official exemption for asylum seekers from Russia. Anne-Marie?
That's interesting. So speaking of the exemption, I presume we're talking about the Trump-era pandemic restrictions, right, that were in place before that allowed people to be deported almost immediately so that we wouldn't have the pandemic spreading. Ukrainians are exempt from that, but that is due to expire in May, which we are expecting many more people to show up at the border as a result. Is that going to have an impact on the Ukrainians that are seeking safety?
You know, the simple answer is always when it comes to immigration is it's complicated. So yes, you have Title 42 expected to be lifted May 23rd, the decision of the Biden administration. From every indication on the ground here, it seems that given the war in Ukraine, that it's still going on, it appears that Ukrainians may still be allowed through on a case-by-case basis in these small batches that we've been seeing. Just about 30 minutes ago, we saw another group of 25 or so being allowed to enter the United States. The bigger question is that from people from other countries, many of them are hopeful that they'll be able to request asylum and not be turned away immediately because of that pandemic-era rule. But that remains to be seen because you also have the Remain in Mexico policy that has not gone away, which requires asylum seekers to stay here while they wait for their claims to be heard.
So, Manny, there are a number of different agencies that would sort of oversee this process when you come in through this way, through the border, the southern border. We've got the State Department, we have U.S. Customs, we have Border Protection. Have you heard from any of these agencies about just how they're handling this? Do they have the resources they need? Are the processes in place?
We've not heard from anybody here on the U.S. side of the border. Of course, all those requests for information go through the official channels. We have heard just generally from the Biden administration, one, that they would welcome 100,000 Ukrainian refugees into the United States, and two, that they have plans in place to beef up the number of border agents and the asylum process to try to streamline it because they are expecting to see more migrants approaching the border as Title 42 is lifted. But specifics so far as how Ukrainians can access the United States, we're not hearing those details other than people here on the border allowing them in, those agents, on a case-by-case basis, as those volunteers have told us, on a humanitarian basis, only so far at this point.
Manny, before I let you go, and when you were speaking to some of these Ukrainians, I'm just sort of curious, do many of them have relatives in the U.S.?
Yes, many of them do. One of the women in our story had a brother in the United States. The other one had friends who live in the United States. So there is a diaspora, and that's why they've decided, we're going to Poland, we're going to Germany, but then we're going to try to get to Mexico because we want to get into the United States. They consider this, of course, to be the safest and best place for them as the war in Ukraine rages on.
Incredible stories, Manny. Thank you very much. Well, a high-stakes vote is expected today on the future of President Biden's Supreme Court nominee, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. The Senate Judiciary Committee will weigh her future. Ahead, Nicole Killian joins me with all the latest details on that. And a programming note for you, you can enjoy a special performance from the groundbreaking musical David Byrne's American Utopia and Anthony Mason's interview with David Byrne himself right here. Saturday Sessions presents David Byrne and American Utopia. Streams today at 8:30 p.m. and then on demand on the CBS News app. We are going to take a quick break, which means you have about 3 minutes to download the free CBS News app on all your devices. Our app gives you the best of CBS News all in one place.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's
not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yes. We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Man, for the third week in a row, parts of the South are facing more tornado threats. So for more on the forecast, let's bring in meteorologist Stephanie Abrams from our partners at the Weather Channel. Stephanie, when is this going to end?
And Anne-Marie, this week we have the ingredients. They're just not as strong and not as aligned in the atmosphere, but that doesn't mean that you won't get severe weather. We have that threat. We still have it anywhere from Texas all the way into the Carolinas, and I'm talking Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and even moving into Thursday. So let's break it down day by day, starting with today. We are going to see the potential here from Oklahoma to Texas, Texarkana, all the way over into Mississippi. As we roll into tomorrow, that threat is going to expand. It's going to get bigger. And the reason being, one of the reasons is we have this real punch of some low-level winds coming in. So that really makes matters worse. Overnight tonight, we start to get our act together here along the Red River Valley, and it all presses towards the Mississippi River Valley. Now you have these lone cells, hail, damaging winds, and potential for tornadoes and heavy rain, but the overall system could also give us some very strong winds as we're rolling through our Tuesday. So tomorrow it's the I-10, I-20 corridor, and then making their way all the way to the East Coast for our Wednesday and also into our Thursday. But it's not just the hail, the wind, the potential for tornadoes. It's also the very heavy rain. Now, we could use the rain right along the coastal areas, going towards Louisiana, southern Arkansas, and on into Texas, but the heaviest rain is going to be right here in between Alabama and Georgia. That's where we will probably see our heaviest rainfalls of 2 to 3 inches. Anne-Marie, you can catch live coverage of the severe threat all day on the Weather Channel television network.
All right, Stephanie, thank you very much. You can also get the latest on the weather in your area on the CBS News app. It gives you access to all of our CBS News national and local streams for free, anytime, anywhere. Well, this week, Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson could come one step closer to being the first African-American woman to serve on the High Court. In just a few hours, the Senate Judiciary Committee is expected to hold a key vote on her future. Congressional correspondent Nicole Killian has been covering the process for us. So how do we expect this vote to go?
Well, we expect it to go a couple of different ways. The bottom line is by the end of the week, it appears that Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson has enough support to be confirmed by the full Senate to the Supreme Court. But her first hurdle is going to be today in the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is expected to vote on a party line vote. Many Republicans on the panel have expressed concerns about her judicial philosophy and some of her sentencing decisions and have already come out saying that they will oppose her. If the committee splits in a tie, Democrats can still, however, advance her nomination and are planning a floor vote later this week. Jackson is expected to have the full backing of Democrats and at least one Republican, Maine Senator Susan Collins, which would allow her to be confirmed with at least some bipartisan support. A senior White House advisor tells me that they believe that there are still some undecided GOP lawmakers out there that they hope to get, which is why Judge Jackson is back on the Hill this week, meeting with more senators ahead of the final vote. Anne Marie?
All right, Nicole, thank you very much. Well, the time now is 7:50, and this is a live look at New York's Times Square, home of CBS Mornings. Nate Burleson is standing by with a preview of the show. Nate, good morning.
Good morning, Anne Marie. Ahead on CBS Mornings, there is international outrage as more gruesome images emerge from the war in Ukraine. We're at the U.S.-Mexican border where hundreds of Ukrainian refugees are waiting to cross over. We'll show you why they are in Mexico. Plus, it was the biggest night in music. Our very own Anthony Mason was at the Grammys, and he will join us live from Las Vegas with the biggest winners from last night. And David Begnaud follows one man's emotional journey as he fights to overcome a disorder that affects millions of Americans. We will see you at 8.
All right, see you then. Thank you. March Madness wraps up tonight with the men's final. However, all eyes were on the women's championship game yesterday. South Carolina defeated UConn 64-49. This is the second national title for the Gamecocks under coach Dawn Staley. For the men, Kansas will be up against North Carolina this evening in a game that will determine the tournament winner. The matchup coming up after Kansas beat Villanova and North Carolina took out Duke this weekend. Well, the time now is 7:51. Here's a look at what's coming up today. The Senate Judiciary Committee is expected to vote on Supreme Court Justice nominee Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson later on this morning. The full Senate could vote on her nomination by the end of the week, and we'll have full coverage starting at 10 a.m. Eastern. And the House Rules Committee will hold a hearing on Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino later on this afternoon. And this comes after the January 6th panel voted to hold both former Trump aides in contempt of Congress for failing to cooperate with lawmakers' investigation. Plus, Carolina faces off against Kansas tonight in the men's March Madness Championship game. This, of course, comes after UNC beat Duke and Kansas toppled Villanova over the weekend. The tip-off begins at 9:20 Eastern. And before all of that, we're going to have a full recap of the Grammys coming up in our 9 o'clock hour. Billboard editor Joe Levy will join us to talk all about the highlights from music's biggest night, and you can stream that at 9:45 Eastern. If you are heading out the door, take us with you. You can access all of our CBS News national and local streams for free anytime, anywhere on the CBS News app. CBS Mornings is next. I'll see you in an hour.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do? It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
50 shows running, the lights blinking.
People fight their entire career to get to Broadway.
You trained your entire life.
Spotlights, drama, passion.
This is what we live for.
Until COVID turned off the lights.
It's like going from a bright light to pitch black.
Scenes from Broadway's unique struggle with COVID.
It was devastating.
Broadway contributes about $15 billion to New York City's economy and 100,000 jobs.
The sound team, the lighting team, everyone.
The world does not realize how big this is.
This is how we make money.
This is a specialized industry. You don't tell a doctor to go get a serving job. You just, why are we different?
Are we going to be able to pay our rent? Am I going to have food?
What will happen in Broadway's new opening act?
We're in uncharted waters again.
The show must go on.
There is reason to hope again.
I think people are going to be crying. I know I will.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Society is deeply uncomfortable with a woman holding power.
For women, corporate America has been an uphill battle.
You're emotional, you're harsh, you're cold.
And it still is.
That's when I realized womanness was at a disadvantage for me.
Women of color sit at the painful intersection of race and gender discrimination.
You put in the work, and you're ultimately not the one who gets credit for it.
Many professional women had to make a decision between employment and caregiving.
Gender discrimination is the one thing that has transcended time and race and religion. It is literally written into the Bible.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Shots fired, second floor.
Pleading with legislators, listen to us. Do something about this epidemic.
The agenda ultimately is to disarm the populace.
They come for our throats. We need to fight back fire.